I look at past behavior, and I think if anything, we look back and Donald Trump tried to do everything in his power to stop the release of the files. Pam Bondi essentially said they were on her desk, never released them. They tried to launch this whole campaign within the Republican members of Congress to not vote to get them released as well. And so there is no question that they've been involved in covering up the files, that they've not wanted them to be released. So this idea that somehow they all of a sudden want to see all these files released on Friday, I don't think that's credible. I mean, we can buy that. I think, look, we're probably going to get something on Friday. I hope it's everything, but I think it's likely that we're going to get some limited release on Friday, that we're going to get some type of excuse about why they can't release everything. But we'll wait and see. I hope that they do the right thing, get all the files released.
Look, I just look at past behavior. And I think if anything, we look back and Donald Trump tried to do everything in his power to stop the release of the files. Pam Bondi essentially said they were on our desk, never released them. They tried to launch this whole campaign within the Republican members of Congress to not vote to get them released as well. And so there is no question that they've been involved in covering up the files, that they've not wanted them to be released. So this idea that somehow they all of a sudden want to see all these files released on Friday, I don't think that's credible, and we can buy that. I think, look, we're probably going to get something on Friday. I hope it's everything, but I think it's likely that we're going to get some limited release on Friday, that we're going to get some type of excuse about why they can't release everything. But we'll wait and see. I hope that they do the right thing, get all the files released. If their past actions are any indication of what they're going to do, I highly doubt we're going to see that. By the way, I am trying to do my best to gather all the information I can for you and share it with you. Please leave your likes and comments, and I would be grateful if you subscribed. Let's continue. You know, of all people, Thomas Massie has been pretty outspoken about the fact that there will be consequences if these files aren't released, that it's not like this was some voluntary suggestion that they do that. This is an actual law. And so what are the consequences that will be imposed if we don't see these files? And frankly, who's there to enforce consequences if it's the DOJ that's being forced to do this? Look, I think first Tom Massie is right, and I think even the Senate has been talking about legal avenues. And we agree with that. We've been talking to our Senate partners. We think that there are ways that we can use the courts if we need to. There are other tools that we have that we're going to push really hard on. And honestly, the public is also demanding this. And I think what Donald Trump and Pam Bondi need to understand is that the release of the files is popular amongst their MAGA base. I mean, incredibly popular. So Republicans in Congress are now also getting that pressure to move forward and to push this release. And so they're not going to be able to hide the truth forever. They need to understand that the truth is going to come out. They can try to kick and scream and drag their feet. The truth is going to come out. So I hope they release substantial documents on Friday. We'll see what's there. But if they don't, we're going to push like hell to ensure that we finally get the truth. And we have information and we have reports of what might be in the files. And I think we're going to obviously use that information to our advantage as we see what's released by the Department of Justice. To what extent does the fact that there are still files that exist from the Epstein estate, does that serve as kind of a way for the administration, if they decide not to release these files, that at least that's a stopgap to show that, okay, if you don't want to release the files as the law demands that you do, you're going to have to contend with the drip, drip, drip of this never-ending tranche of files from the Epstein estate, which is already going to accomplish what the administration refuses to do. And it's going to make the administration look like they're engaged in this ongoing cover-up. I think that's right. I mean, look, I think first we're going to get information from other sources. It's not just the DOJ. A lot of the information that we're getting from the Epstein estate, we're not even sure if the DOJ has. And so the information from the estate is incredibly important. Our one-on-one conversations with survivors are incredibly important. Our conversations with others that have worked on these files in our public agencies. And knowing that there's so many civil servants that have put work and FBI agents into the truth, I think should concern the Department of Justice. They should do the right thing, be transparent, and release all the files. That is in their power to do so. And Donald Trump could do that today. He doesn't need a law. He doesn't need the subpoena that we've had in place for many months. He can just do the right thing. So we are going to continue to put out information, and the DOJ needs to understand that. Can I have your reaction to the Vanity Fair article that came out today? Obviously was pretty explosive within the White House, and everybody has kind of run to Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, her aid in her effort to kind of disparage the story that she did more than a dozen interviews for, or roughly a dozen interviews for. So a little bit bizarre that she's now trying to run away from her own words. But she stated that Pam Bondi was wrong to suggest that the Epstein file, the client list, was on her desk. She said, quote, I think she completely whiffed on appreciating that that was the very targeted group that cared about this. First, she gave them binders full of nothingness. Then she said that the witness list or the client list was on her desk. There is no client list, and it sure as hell wasn't on her desk. So can you speak on kind of this bait and switch that took place at the hands of Pam Bondi that included all of these right-wing influencers that's really just become the basis for what's turned into a laughingstock at the hands of this White House? Yeah, I mean, look, there's no question. I mean, Pam Bondi, they tried to sweep this under the rug. I mean, I suspect that she tried to do so at the direction of the president. I mean, I think these folks in the cabinet aren't doing things on their own. They're taking direction from President Trump. And so there's no question that Pam Bondi, I think, was trying to hide the files. They tried to create essentially this public spectacle with all these right-wing influencers. I mean, it didn't work. And right now, a lot of the MAGA base is turning on Trump, is turning on Pam Bondi. They also believe there's something that's being covered up. And so we just want the truth. All we want is the powerful men that did harm to these women, and in some cases children when they were younger. They deserve to be held accountable. We need to have justice, and that's what this release of the files and this investigation is all about. And so I hope that the DOJ does the right thing. But I think the Susie Wiles interview, particularly around the Epstein files, is obviously really interesting. It's worth asking here, and we've spoken about this in the past, but for posterity, how are you going to be ensured that what does come out, if something does come out on Friday with the Epstein files, that it is the entirety of the Epstein files? What can you judge the released files against to ensure that you have the whole thing? Well, we have some idea of the amount of documents that are over there. And so obviously we'd be looking at that. But we also are aware of some of the information that should be released. And so if that's not released, we're going to start asking questions. And I think we'll compare kind of our investigation, see what comes out of the DOJ. But again, I highly doubt we're going to get everything on Friday. I just don't see how the Trump administration is willing to do it. We're talking about the most corrupt administration in the history of the United States. And all of a sudden, they're going to release all the Epstein files. I just don't see them doing that. But I'm hopeful that they do something and that we actually can get justice for these survivors. You know, there are prosecutors who worked at the DOJ, like Maureen Comey, for example, who were fired, who oversaw this stuff. Would it be possible to bring them in for some type of public hearing? And would the Democrats have the ability to issue those subpoenas or request those voluntary interviews, given that you're in the minority? There's a lot of people that we want to speak with. Certainly, we'd love to do it, and we'd love for them to come in. We are talking to a lot of people that have worked on the documents before. And certainly in the majority, we would have the power to compel anyone that we wanted to come speak in front of the committee. And so this work continues. We're just getting started. I've told folks this is a complex investigation. And I imagine that if we don't have the truth and things aren't out by the time that we take the majority back, you better believe that with the power of subpoena, we're going to be compelling a lot of people to come in and speak to us about what they actually know about Jeffrey Epstein and all the powerful men that he worked with. Do the subpoenas have to be agreed to by James Comer and the oversight Republicans, or do you have the power as the minority party on that committee to be able to issue those subpoenas? Minority party has no power to issue subpoenas. It's all in the majority power. The only reason that we've gotten some subpoenas through in this Congress is because we've forced votes where we've had some Republicans join us. That's very rare. I mean, that doesn't happen. And so, in the next Congress, when we hopefully take the majority back, it'll be Democrats who completely control subpoena power. Republicans won't have any control over that. In terms of this issue in particular, I mean, we have seen numerous instances of Republicans stepping up and defying this administration. For example, we saw it with those Indiana Republicans who decided not to redraw their maps despite intense pressure from not just the White House, but even Mike Johnson. Then, just within the last 24 hours, when Rob Reiner's son was murdered in his home and Trump put out his disgusting statement, we had a number of Republicans come out and basically disparage the fact that he said what he said, including John Kennedy in the Senate, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Stephanie Bice, Thomas Massie. Are you getting a sense from your Republican colleagues that the cost of defying Donald Trump is lower than it used to be and that he is at his weakest point thus far? I think Republicans definitely know that. Look, the one person that seems like just in lockstep with Trump is the speaker. I mean, Mike Johnson clearly is still controlled by Donald Trump. There is definitely a crack in the rest of that caucus, and there are Republicans that are coming out. They're speaking out against some of what Donald Trump is doing, whether it's Marjorie Taylor Greene or others that are taking a different direction. I think what happened recently, of course, with Rob Reiner and the Reiner family and that horrific murder, and you're having a lot of Republicans speak out against that and what Donald Trump actually said, the horrific comments he made. So I think you're seeing more of that. I think that will continue as Donald Trump continues to get weaker. Last question here. Can I have your reaction to the fact that this president and this party swept into office amid promises that they would bring your costs down on day one, that the inflation that was plaguing the Biden administration would be immediately taken care of? And yet just today, we found out that the White House added a paltry 64,000 jobs, bringing their total since May. So in the last 6 months, they've added roughly 110,000 jobs in 6 months. For comparison, the worst month that Joe Biden ever had would be 85,000 jobs added. This last 6 months was just above that. The unemployment rate also jumped up to 4.6%. So watching the economy kind of crash and burn to the extent that it has, can I just have your reaction to the fact that this is happening in an administration where they promised the sun and the earth in terms of how the economy would flourish? I think you ask any American, you ask working class families, their cost of groceries are up, their rent is up, they're having a hard time paying the mortgage in many cases, and now healthcare costs are going to skyrocket because Republicans would rather give tax breaks to billionaires than to extend the Affordable Care Act, the tax credits. And so costs are going up, unemployment is going up, people are having a hard time just affording to live. And so that promise was what Donald Trump said he would fix, right? Day one, he was going to fix all of this. It's gotten worse. And so Donald Trump has lied to the American public. Republicans have really no interest in making life more affordable, which is why you're seeing every single day more and more folks turning their backs on Donald Trump. He has lied to the public. There's corruption there. He's enriching his family and his billionaire friends. And we're here to say enough and working to stop it. Switching gears here, Mike Johnson had announced that he will not allow a vote on extending the ACA subsidies. There was some reporting that within the conference meeting that one Republican had stood up and basically said that it's because it's going to make life more difficult for these Republicans who are going to run in an election year where people's health care prices are going to rise 2, 3, 4, 5 times higher than they were this year. And so your reaction to the fact that Mike Johnson, who is the Speaker of the House, is basically hell-bent on ensuring that healthcare prices surge. It's crazy to me that Republicans don't want to extend these healthcare tax credits. I mean, people right now are getting bills. They're seeing their healthcare premiums in some cases. There was a couple I just saw triple. They're triple the costs of their healthcare. Others are seeing their costs double. And for most folks, you're going to see a dramatic increase. People can't afford that. And so the fact that Mike Johnson won't allow a vote to come to the floor, that's a basic extension, but allows votes to come in for tax cuts for billionaires, for tax breaks for large corporations, is crazy. But this is what Donald Trump wants. They want to keep working class folks down. They want to enrich the powerful in this country. And there's no sense if we're going to get a vote on this. Even the moderates in the Republican Party, of the few that are left, are demanding a vote, yet Mike Johnson refuses to schedule one. Let me add some additional context here because what Congressman Garcia is laying out is the complete picture of Republican governance right now. Corruption on Epstein files, economic failure, healthcare being stripped away, and all of it happening while they promise the exact opposite. On the Epstein files, Garcia is being diplomatic but realistic. He hopes DOJ releases everything Friday, but based on past behavior, he expects a limited release with excuses. And he's right to be skeptical. Trump tried everything to stop the release. Bondi claimed files were on her desk, then never released them. They lobbied Republicans not to vote for release. Now, Susie Wiles, Trump's chief of staff, admits in Vanity Fair that Bondi gave influencers binders full of nothingness and lied about the client list being on her desk. There is no client list, and it sure as hell wasn't on her desk. That's Trump's own chief of staff exposing the attorney general's lies about Epstein files. This was a deliberate bait and switch. Invite right-wing influencers to the White House. Give them empty binders. Claim you're being transparent. Hope the base believes you. But it didn't work. The MAGA base is turning on Trump over this because they actually do want these files released. They want to know which powerful men were involved with Epstein. And Garcia's right that the estate files provide a backup plan. If DOJ won't release, the drip, drip, drip from the estate will keep this in the news. 95,000 photos, most not yet reviewed. Thousands more being released weekly, each batch showing more connections between Epstein and powerful men, including Trump. That creates pressure DOJ can't escape. Either release the files as the law requires, or look like you're covering up while the estate keeps revealing damaging information anyway. Either way, the truth is coming out. On enforcement, Garcia mentions courts and other tools. Thomas Massie has said there will be consequences. The law is clear. DOJ must release by Friday. If they don't, Congress can sue. They can hold hearings. They can use contempt powers. They can make this the dominant story until compliance happens. And Garcia makes a crucial point about taking back the majority. Right now, as minority, Democrats have no subpoena power. They can only get subpoenas when Republicans join them, which is rare. But when Democrats take the majority in 2026, they'll have full subpoena power. They can compel testimony from anyone who worked on Epstein investigations. Prosecutors like Maureen Comey, who were fired, FBI agents, anyone with knowledge. That's why Republicans are terrified of losing the majority. Right now, they can block investigations. After 2026, they won't be able to stop Democrats from uncovering everything. On Trump's weakness, Garcia confirms what we're seeing. Republicans are starting to defect. Indiana refused to redraw maps despite pressure. Multiple Republicans condemned Trump's disgusting comments about Rob Reiner after his son was murdered. Marjorie Taylor Greene is openly breaking with Trump. The cracks are growing. Trump is at his weakest point. His approval has cratered. Republicans are retiring in record numbers. Defying him carries less cost than it used to, and that will accelerate as we get closer to 2026 when Republicans face voters angry about healthcare costs, economic stagnation, and corruption. On the economy, Garcia lays out the failure. Trump promised to fix inflation and bring costs down day one. Instead, only 64,000 jobs added in the last month, just 110,000 total in 6 months. Biden's worst month was 85,000, so Trump is barely above that. Unemployment jumped to 4.6%. Grocery costs up, rent up, mortgages unaffordable, and now healthcare costs about to skyrocket because Republicans won't extend ACA subsidies. People's premiums are doubling or tripling, and Mike Johnson won't even allow a vote on extending subsidies while he schedules votes on tax cuts for billionaires. This is the Republican agenda laid bare. Tax cuts for the wealthy, nothing for working families. Actually making things worse by letting healthcare subsidies expire and lying about all of it while claiming they're making life more affordable. Garcia is right that people are turning on Trump because of this. They were promised prosperity. They got economic stagnation, higher costs, and stripped healthcare. That's not what they voted for. And they're realizing they were lied to. The Epstein cover-up, the economic failure, the healthcare crisis, it's all connected. It's all Republican policy priorities. Protect the powerful, screw everyone else, and lie about it constantly. But the truth is coming out. On Epstein through estate files and eventually DOJ release. On the economy through job reports and unemployment data. On healthcare through premium increases people are seeing in their bills. And when Democrats take back the majority in 2026, there will be subpoenas, hearings, investigations, and accountability. Republicans know this. That's why they're panicking. That's why they're retiring. That's why some are starting to defect. The walls are closing in. Trump is weak. Republicans are divided. And Democrats are positioning to take power and finally deliver truth and accountability. Subscribe to follow all of this. The Epstein files release on Friday. The economic data getting worse. The healthcare crisis accelerating. The Republican defections increasing. It's all happening simultaneously, and it's all pointing toward a reckoning in 2026.